Hello, this is Michael Rees. Welcome to Ad Hoc, a virtual talk series. I'm a sculptor and new media naut. I'm here to have fun and sharp conversations with some of the smartest people in art, technology, and sculpture. My interests and those of our guests will range far and wide and focus on making and the artist's role in our current era. We'll be talking to artists, curators, designers, and more. Welcome to Ad Hoc. We'll have a nice conversation, but tell everybody a little bit about who you are. You have you're several people in the show are academics. You are also an academic. So talk to us a little bit about your background and, set that up for us.
Okay. Setting that up, I always like to kind of preface my kind of academic title with the fact that I don't come from a background of academia. I come from a small town in the American South. Half of my family are from the Appalachian Mountains. And early on, through reading, through a love of art, through just aspirations to kind of see more of the world, education became really important to me. And in pursuing a graduate degree, that's how I got to the Northeast, got away from some of the less inspiring aspects of Southern culture in the United States. And I got a graduate degree in 1995 in painting. I actually have 2 degrees in fine arts and painting. And then upon moving to New York and just falling into, actually, it really wasn't something I'd expected, assisting artists working with new and emerging technologies, I recognized that there was a new path I wanted to take in my own art. So I had to do it dramatically. I threw away all my paintings, not as dramatically as Baldessari, who burned them, but I did need to make that break. And then for 10 years, from 1995 to 2005, I developed a new practice, a practice that was incorporating digital media into my work, but not only into the tools that I used, actually the themes that I addressed in my work. And that finally led me back to academia in 2005, but I was no longer teaching painting classes like I had as a grad assistant in graduate school. I was teaching emerging technologies, and I've been doing that ever since. So I've taught at SVA, Mercy College, Pratt Institute for several years, and I am now, a year and a half in, teaching in the Integrated Digital Media program at NYU in Tandon School of Engineering. So it's my first time also not teaching in an art school, but teaching in an engineering school. And there's a really exciting kind of hybrid mix. The program I'm in is the program for the freaks, in a way, the art freaks. But I work with engineers, scientists, artists whose practices represent a spectrum of ways that one can approach creativity using emerging technologies, and it's really an exciting place to be.
That's fantastic. So, one thing I alluded to it earlier. I mean, you are absolutely a fecund artist. You are always busy. You are always working on projects. And if you go to your website, I mean, the first thing that greets you is a whole host. Oh, by the way, your website, of course, is carlagannis.com, right?
Yes, thank you.
Isn't that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
Make sure that everybody knows where to go and what to do. But Carla, the first thing that greets you is a whole host of projects, and then you go into the website, and then there's a whole host of other projects,
Right.
And you've been involved on many different levels. It's like you have really mastered your craft, the technology, and the ability to. I know that you're always learning new software. You're always doing new things. For example, the Wunderkammer project, which just ended for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was explain that a little bit. Tell us about that project and how so many people met in that space, and tell us what happened.
Sure. I will also mention in your describing my work that I am a maximalist. I attempted early in my career to approach my work in a more minimalist way, particularly when I first threw away all my paintings and kind of began to work again, I actually I went to kind of a point zero, right, where I emptied everything out. And then as I became more confident in my own practice, this maximalist tendency reemerged, and now I just have to own it. So maximalist, horror vacui, that is me.
Yeah, I love that. I was going to ask you about the horror vacui. I'm glad you mentioned it. Yeah, sure.
But to talk about the Wunderkammer project, and that's why I prefaced it with this maximalism, it is a kind of maximalist project. And it began as a personal project and an exploration of the 16th and 17th century convention of creating collections, not only just one cabinet, but entire rooms where collectors who traveled the world would create their own taxonomies, and often they were mixtures of fact and fiction, fantasy, exotica from around the world. And I wanted to approach it, of course, from a 21st century perspective, from a time when we all keep personal Wunderkammer on social media, Pinterest, Instagram, etc. And I created a Wunderkammer called WWW Wunderkammer and collected objects and ephemera, 3D objects, videos, sound clips, etc. from the internet, and created an entire virtual. It actually exists as a physical installation, an augmented reality exhibition, a virtual reality exhibition, and a social VR project.
That's kind of an amazing accomplishment in and of itself.
Yeah, so many layers, and it's an accumulation of thousands of objects representing these different categories that I felt were very important to address at this time, including decolonization, history of politics, endangered species, sex and tech, emerging technology, humor as salve, and an exploration of female-identified comedians and how that lends a voice to feminism. And so I created this entire project. I installed it in March, right as the COVID-19 virus was beginning to kind of explode in the United States. And so the show was extended into the fall. But as things, began to develop over the summer, I worked with my gallerist for that project, Clark Buckner, and we came up with an idea of extending the show. I'd already thought about, kind of, similar to you and the generous invitation you gave to the artists who participated in your show, of opening up this project and extending it. And I thought about it prior to that, but when the world kind of exploded, first with one pandemic, but secondly with the realization of a longer lasting pandemic, and systemic racism, Clark and I sat down and we really wanted to create a very inclusive show. If I'd had my druthers, there would have been hundreds of artists included, but at some point you have to set a limit. So we invited 57 artists from around the world, and artists whose practices are not always new media. So performance artists, filmmakers, photographers, as well as artists working in emerging technologies and digital media. And we again wanted to create an experience similar to my original Wunderkammer project that was multi-layered or across realities, hybrid. And so we put together a physical installation of the artist's works. They were all moving image works. We also created a website where you could, because of course galleries have not been accessible over the past 10 months, and so that was by appointment only. But then we put together also a website where you could view the moving image works. And then I built a social VR space. So over the past 10 months, I have transitioned from making single user VR experiences to social VR experiences, which can be experienced, can be activated on a web platform, on a browser, with or without a headset. Now, I recommend, if you have a headset, to really get a complete experience. You wear the headset so you're immersed. So anyway, I produced this architectonic form. It's actually a huge splash that housed all 57 works. And that was really exciting to do. It kind of pushed the limits of social VR as well in putting that together. And then over the series of quite a few months, we held Zoom talks with the artists. We held several different openings in VR. We had quite a few visitors to both the social VR space and the website. Generally, we were conducting our talks via Zoom just because the limitations of social VR, or just the fact that a lot of people still don't feel comfortable with it. But it was really important for me to create a space that felt inclusive, of course, and accessible, and accessible to people who may not be as familiar with these technologies.
Right, right. Well, I think that's kind of incredible. The when we started discussing the possibility of inviting artists into Site and Parasite, which was, I say discussing. I always wanted to do it from the very start, but nonetheless, when we started talking about implementation and how to handle it all, it would have been great to be able to open it up to the world and allow people to create their own augments on top of everything. But the technical limitations are intense, and managing those technical limitations are really problematic. And so we just kind of focused. We kept it. So I totally get and totally understand. I mean, what's wonderful about the technology is really how fast it grows, and how often the developers are looking for, particularly people like you, not so much people like me, but particularly people like you, who are absolutely calling for more capability, more ability. And that's kind of amazing that you're just out there. I'm always impressed about how far you go.
Wow.
You go a long way. That's amazing. So, the other thing is, we've known each other for a while, and actually, ironically, I didn't know Tamika or John Craig Freeman very well, but the other artists in the show I did know fairly well. And you and I remember that we've often had conversations about being a comedian, about you being a comedian and how you've wanted to do it. And, it was like a little bit, it was a barrier that you had to get past for yourself, right? And I was so delighted when you made Lucille trackball, and you got her to tell, Lucille told the joke in the show. I was absolutely delighted that after all our conversations, and that you did that. And so tell us a little bit about Lucille trackball. I mean, I think that it's related to Carl, C.A.R.L.A.G.A.N, right?
Yeah.
I think that Lucille, and so tell us a little bit about that, and also introduce Carla again.
Sure. So I've been working with avatars and alternate identities for over 20 years. My first one emerged in 1998. Her name was Sister Gemini. And at the time, I was working commercially as a web designer during the day. And so she fictitiously hacked into websites doing electronic dulcimer, which is an Appalachian instrument my grandfather made, performances in the evening. And so this has been a kind of predominant theme. There's several other avatars who I have performed or puppeteered over the years. But as avatars have become more ubiquitous, I actually will posit we're living in a post-avatar age. And when I say that, it's like the term post-internet, where it's not that we are beyond the internet, it's just the internet has become so ubiquitous, it influences all of our lives. It's no longer something that is kind of special or unique to a few, right? And so, your grandmother or mother, has a Bitmoji avatar. So over the past few years, I have just gone maximal again. So I have about 8 different avatars in the Carla universe, including Carla Gann, cross-platform avatar for recursive life action generative adversarial network. And she and I collaborate on a consistent basis. We have produced 2 solo shows. In addition, there's Lucille Trackball, who is very near and dear to my heart. Lucille uses she, her, or they, them pronouns. And Lucille emerged particularly in response to my own feelings about getting older and kind of recognizing, out of all those different isms that exist and need to be paid attention to, ageism. And so some of Lucille's stand-up, just like Sister Gemini, was a way for me to kind of project a voice that I didn't feel comfortable using or projecting in my daily career as a web designer at the time, Lucille Trackball gave me a little latitude to touch on some topics that maybe I'm a little uncomfortable as Carla Gannis myself speaking to. And so through Lucille, she's very cartoonish. She's comprised of emoji,
in an Arcimbaldo kind of way.
Arcimbaldo kind of way, yeah. I have a whole series of avatars that allude to Arcimbaldo's kind of uncanny portraiture, mannerist painter from the 17th century. And so Lucille, though, out of all the characters, even Carla Gann, is the one that I have had the most fun with, but she's also, or they have also been the most difficult character for me, because as you were mentioning, Michael, and I was so happy that I was invited to participate in your show and that I could include Lucille. It was very special, and it was kind of a tribute to you, because you have been a person who has encouraged me to explore that.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned earlier, given where I came from and always studying and always just trying to get out of the South, I sometimes can be overly earnest. And to get to explore comedy and absurdity, particularly through this highly absurd character, is an incredible release. And can you hold on one second?
Sure, no, that's okay.
What's going on? Yeah. Okay. Just checking in with Cleveland. Of course, he says hi, by the way. Okay.
Oh, well.
Back to our regularly scheduled program. And Lucille,
nice. It's natural in this day and age.
When like we're having this conversation. This is my studio, my apartment, and my classroom, etc. Yeah. This is being recorded.
Oh, yeah, sorry. You should put your screen up.
You know what? This actually came at a wonderful time as we're talking about this, and I'm talking about not taking myself so seriously. That's when I need to be interrupted by Cleveland sticking his arm in between the green screen. So anyway, I found this great joke on Reddit. So I was trying for a while to write all my own material for Lucille, and most of it wasn't, that funny. Nor is
Lucille, of course, is a reference to Lucille Ball, right?
Oh, yes, of course. Thank you.
Also, they're a great comedian who is not a, 20-year-old something or other, but a very sophisticated woman, very mature, and yet at the same time had kind of an incredible energy. And so you're playing off of that, too.
Oh, certainly. So Lucille Ball actually didn't start in television until her 40s.
That's amazing.
And she also started her own production company. She was a person with a great deal of business acumen in addition to being a comedic genius. And so certainly she was was the main inspiration for Lucille Trackball. And Lucille is some kind of combination, as I was building the avatar out, of Lucille Ball, myself. I have performed Lucille Trackball in various instances through face tracking. So I'm literally puppeting her, and it's not a 3D model. And also, of course, the trackball that we all use for our digital computing and making our games, etc. So, a play on words, as I like to do. And then for the show at Grounds for Sculpture, I chose the clown image as my trigger image. And I found a joke on Reddit about an inflatable boy and this whole inflatable universe. And it's a absurd, funny, but kind of darkly funny joke. And it fits so well with your themes. And so I was really happy to participate. And Lucille
your work, as well as a couple of other people, really specifically engaged themes of the show. And at the same time, also, what I've really appreciated about it was that you and the other artists as well maintained a real sense of their own identity. In other words, you didn't give over to the theme of the show. You connected to the theme of the show. And that was kind of fascinating. Even though I don't think that the group show was organized thematically as much as it was like a Wunderkammer kind of experience, everybody having a different attitude, different approach, different concept, and filling it out. I'll tell you that last weekend, just yesterday, 2 days ago, we had a couple of people. The show closed this week. I saw that. They're taking it down today. and we had a couple of people, mostly my graduate students and others, come in, and we all, there you go, beautiful, thank you very much. Thank you. But we invited everybody in to see your piece, and I'm telling you, everybody cracked up. Everybody cracked up. It really works. It's a great gig,
Well, I realized the laugh track was really essential because as I performed Lucille Trackball, I performed Lucille Trackball in London a few months prior to producing the piece for your show. And it was at a computer tech conference. And so I had a pretty tough audience. Yeah. And I recognized and actually added the laugh track right before, a day before I went on, because I was attending, these various presentations, and everybody has this very stern face. And I realized that it would be very difficult to break the ice. And in adding the laugh track, there were people who I had not seen smile the entire week of the conference who were kind of, starting to crack up.
It's amazing about humor that you really do have to set up the context. And because if you don't set up that context, it seems bombastic, it seems extreme, it seems interruptive and disruptive and rude and blah, 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 all these various other things. But if you set it up, if you set up the expectation for humor to take place, people, they come along with you. They come, and the laugh track does that. But I also think that was something that was fascinating, because it's using a sort of a trope of old media. Now, certainly, I think we can call television old old media, right? Yeah. But also, if I'm not mistaken, I Love Lucy had a laugh track, didn't they?
Yeah.
And so it seemed to reflect that other political, or that other TV reality, where TV is teaching people how to respond to it.
Well, that's something that's been really illuminated by the COVID-19 and watching comedians as they started to broadcast from home. And quite a few were not including laugh tracks. And the experience of watching them or laughing at them with them was entirely different than it had been before, when they were in front of a live TV audience and it's contagious. Laughter is contagious. And so you're kind of caught up in the moment, even if you're not there in the physical audience, and you laugh along with the joke. And the kind of emptiness, of these comedians performing with no audience, no laugh track, it really kind of heightened my awareness of how important those contexts are.
Yeah. Right. It's fascinating. I mean, I've experimented quite a bit. I mean, my work has a, significant level of humor, at least I think so.
Yeah, it does. It does. And absurdity. Yeah,
lots of absurdity. And and the thing is that I've struggled with this quite a bit to help, if people come in with the mindset that they're going to experience art, it can really be complicated. And people just really feel out of place when the humor starts. They really, really feel out of place. I kind of like that displacement. I like, I'm always about that moment where you break down all of the boundaries, all of the sort of tissue barriers, and you're left with like, oh my God, what do I make of this? What do I make of this? And I feel like you and I share that kind of experience. Like, I think your work does the same thing. Not just, you're completely independent. It's not like we're working on the same thing together, but that maximalist approach, you really are breaking down expectations to the viewer and almost leaving them like a deer in the headlights sometimes. I remember that show that I saw that you did at Kalani Nicole's transfer space out in Brooklyn. That thing was just incredible, like an extravaganza, very carnivalesque.
Yeah.
Right? And very, almost got a circus quality, but also bombastic and absurd, right?
Yeah.
Almost taking media to its extreme, to its logical extreme.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I do see those kind of connections in our work. Although our ways of kind of the aesthetics or the approaches are quite different. But I think, we both like to kind of set up a kind of cognitive dissonant experience where you come in with certain expectations and those expectations are confounded. But if you stay long enough, you see that this work is multivalent. That if you actually will stand in front of it long enough or use whatever device you need to activate it, that there are other frequencies and other ways of entering the work or, kind of deeper signifiers.
Yeah.
But I think I particularly am dealing with the language of internet semiotics, right? Sure. And so, I kind of start with this surface detail, so to speak. But if one kind of gives the work a moment or allows himself to absorb kind of this cacophony, hopefully they start to make other connections and understand other ways that I'm trying to communicate or express. One other thing, though, someone who I really admire, and I think conceptual art, particularly for you and for me, has been so significant to my practice. And when I say conceptual art, I'm talking about the 60s and 70s when emerging media, TV, Namjoon Paik video, all of these things, the dematerialized art object, all of that I think has significantly shaped and influenced new media art trends, our kind of interests, our philosophies. And so someone like Bruce Nauman, where he worked with visual puns, also his experiments with failing to levitate in the studio, like revisiting that piece was one way that I felt that I had the kind of latitude or agency to explore humor, for example, because it could be about my avatar's failure really being funny, which in a way you become more empathetic to that character. And so, that work was really significant to me. Of course, Lynn Hirschman-Leeson's work and, her kind of exploration of digital identity and multiplicity has been so influential too. But then, of course, also pop culture. I mean, I do dig into that domain, and there are times where people see my work and they're very resistant to it. And I, that's
because of the pop culture references or because of the conceptual part, you think?
And when I say that, I might, when I say that there are as many people who have been receptive to my work, but particularly the Garden of Emoji Delights, which was a piece that I made several years ago where it's a remix mashup of Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. And so I spent a year of my life emojifying it, so to speak, and creating an animated version. And the piece went viral, which I did not expect. And so I am definitely, not saying that people do not respond to my work positively. From a teenager, sending me an email, or a college student saying they have a reproduction of it that they've printed out from the internet hanging in their dorm room, to, some influential critics and curators who have responded to the work. And I thought I was going to get laughed out of the gallery when I first showed that work, right? And so there's been an unexpected...
Fear. The artist's fear.
Oh, so much fear. Yeah, because that is an incredibly absurd work. But it's also, it was the early days. I first started working on the piece and producing the piece in 2013, so it was still early-ish days of emojis, although we've been kind of using these shorthand expressions, emoticons and emoji for years before, but when they were really starting to kind of gain a cultural currency and a larger cultural currency. And so I was surprised how seriously people took the work, particularly when I created an animated version where hell freezes over, where paradise is a falling plane and boat kind of destroy paradise, and it becomes this, arid desert climate. In the middle panel, it's depopulated of animals and humans, a nod to the Anthropocene. So there were other things I was trying to address, and several people got it. Just the same, there are certain people, in the arts who expect a gravitas And my work will never appeal to them, even though I feel like there is gravitas in my work. And I think most absurdity actually has sometimes a deeper gravitas, right? And that's there. But there are certain people who just won't embrace that, which is fine. If everyone loves your work or if everyone hates your work, those are two kind of poles I don't want to.
Structure of your experience, isn't it?
Yeah.
Don't you sort of, you understand that at the outset, and you don't you?
Yeah, and I mean, of course, there's provocation too. It's kind of like, yeah, let's see what I can get away with. I mean, but also, so some of this, I went to a very conservative painting school. I mean, when I say conservative, kind of reactionary for 1993, 94, 95, because at Boston University, it was a painting school, and like I would have professors come in and I'm reading all this philosophy, I'm studying film, all these things, and they're like, don't read all that, just paint. I'm this one professor, I remember his accent, and I mean, it was all this kind of fifth generation abstract expressionist rhetoric. And so I feel like I am still kind of, in my practice 25 years later, I'm still having kind of this conversation or debate, those voices of old. Yeah.
Yeah, those ghosts that live inside.
Yeah, those ghosts, right?
That haunt us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. They fall away. Away. But I mean, I think you bring something up that I think is really important, or it's something I can identify with, and that is the feeling of stage fright. That when you make something, and you're like, oh boy, I've really gone over the line now. I'm outside the pale. I'm so far outside the pale. Oh, people are going to call me on this now. I think people don't really think that artists have stage fright, or they don't really identify stage fright. We might call it exhibition fright or something like that. But they don't really think that the visual, because there seems to be this remove. But,
right.
But I think they don't realize on some level how fully we identify with our own works, and how our works are little me's, little examples of ourselves.
Yeah, instantiations of ourself. I mean, Carla, cross-platform avatar for recursive life action, is just a very literal instantiation.
Yeah,
right?
You're straight up. You're right there.
Yeah. But I mean, I was thinking about that this morning, Michael. In terms of your work, you spent 3 years on this project. This is a massive project, hugely ambitious. You did, tons and tons of iterations. And then, I mean, in terms of the budget too. So it's not it's stage fright. It's also, oh my gosh, have I just, traveled down the wrong path and invested all of this time and energy. And it takes an incredible amount of fortitude. And as my therapist, who I speak to every Friday, tells me, healthy narcissism, right? I mean, we're living in a time with, egomaniacal and completely solipsistic, authoritarian leaders. And I'm sure you know which one I may be alluding to. And obviously that kind of narcissism is not a role model. But to survive as an artist, the amount of kind of fortitude and belief in self that is required is just innumerable. And I remember when I was in Boston about to move to New York, I have always been very self-deprecating. And for one, it's a defense. It's like, I'll put myself down before anybody else does. Yeah. But I remember an advisor telling me, you are going to get eaten alive in New York if you don't kind of, build your self-esteem. Right. And it is crucial. And even though we may not be performing publicly, you're right. The performance is in the work, in the installation of the work, in the experience that we're providing. So, I mean, kudos to you.
There's a solo nature to or at least people have a perception that it's very solo nature of the exhibition. So it's all on you. It's,
Right.
it lives and dies on you and what you did. Nobody else is involved. Nobody else can take responsibility,
Yeah.
Um,
Although, working in new media, emerging technology, digital media, interdisciplinary arts, however we want to refer to it, there's much more of a collaborative nature to it. Although the art world still the art world expects the solo exhibition, the single artist, but we all know they're much more collaborative endeavors, I think, than the
Sure.
painter working in his garret or her
Absolutely.
garret. Yeah.
I mean, I think of Moby and what happened with Moby, how he was enmeshed and embedded in a whole, distributed network kind of music environment.
Mm-hmm.
And then somehow the financial capitalist, the people that wanted to capitalize on that basically came in and plucked him. Oh, looked around, said, "Oh, you're the one." Plucked him, made him a superstar. Can't blame him, on many levels. I mean, he had opportunities that he'd never had before, etc. But nonetheless, removed him from that communal distributed network kind of environment. And, so I think that's a fact. I mean, certainly he survived it. And, this is the challenge. These are kind of challenges that artists have to go through and work through. In music, I think it's a little easier because musicians always have collaborated and they're always game to collaborate. And there's sort of a tacit understanding that somebody's going to shoot up, and yet at the same time, people want to show up and do their best. But I think you bring up another interesting point, which is the nature of the exhibition itself. We're using so many things that other people have provided. And those could be just as basic as materials, or they could be as profound as the software platforms that we're using. I mean, when I'm in any of these platforms, I feel like I hear the voices of all the people that worked on it.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't think of it as cold code, remote and remote. I think of it as expressive and the thumbprint or fingerprint of the intellect that created it, right?
Right.
And then I'm in there with them, trying to understand what they were implying and all this sort of stuff. I mean, there's this idea that technology is just a tool. And, and I have another idea. I mean, I think it is a tool. There's definitely that aspect. But I have another idea that technology is a philosophy. And it's a philosophy that's encompassing. I wonder how you come down on that idea, on those tensions between these different places of code. What is code?
Well, first,
you use it so much, right?
Yes, but I'm not a great back-end programmer, but I do incorporate code, and quite often other people's code. So there's kind of a hive experience to all the works I produce, and I do refer to myself as a remix artist. Also, for the past few years, and this has really expanded my relationship to my collaboration with Carla Gannis, who I have been collaborating with for 3.5 years. I have been working with an AI platform called Playform. And so I have, for the Wonder Camera project, actually, I spent 1.5 years training this AI platform with thousands of image data sets on these different categories like feminism, decolonization, endangered species, etc. And part of that was a small data attempt to seed at least one AI platform that I had access to with, I cannot claim to be unbiased information, but at least a perspective that may be outside of the computer scientist or the people who generally are the ones who first seed these emerging, evolving other intelligences, artificial intelligences. And so, in working with this machine learning platform, it has made me even more aware of how different a tool a computer is than a paintbrush or a canvas or even a camera, or we'll say a DSLR before a digital camera, right? In that today, when you use Photoshop, it's employing machine learning algorithms. Almost every application we use today, AR as well. I was using BlipR. Again, they're building this AI image recognition database. That was hard to get out. And so to think that of the computer or applications or even code in a static way as a tool just doesn't make sense to me. I think earlier on when I was transitioning from painting to computing or making art that involved computers and moving image and nonlinear, digital editing and all those things, that early transition 20 plus years ago, it did seem more like a tool. But as it has become so important to my practice and so second nature to me, these dichotomies between artificial and kind of authentic or cold and hot, we could get into 60s and McLuhan about cold and hot media, right. These kind of things. I just even though I'm still working with the binary system, don't like to think of this or reduce it to something that's binary, but also working with a machine learning platform, like it's responsive. It's learning, it's evolving. I mean, if you and I've been doing this for a long time, even tech obsolescence, we ourselves have to be incredibly elastic. We are working with an evolving living form, and our art stays alive to that as we have to migrate it to new systems, to new platforms, to find new ways to express it because it no longer can be accessed in a former expression. Yeah. It's very, very different, and it's constant. It is constantly kind of emerging. But it also, the idea that it's learning to, really I've become more sensitive and aware of that as I've worked with these machine learning algorithms.
Well, I mean, as you spoke, I really, in my own mind, I went on a real trip. Because there's so many important subjects in all the things that you said, right? And they really could be pursued further. But I didn't want to miss. So I'm going to segue just a little bit. I didn't want to miss the opportunity to talk about 3D and talk about the notion of sculpture and how sculpture might play or be part of what you do. I mean, in part, this is because these talks are going to be hosted on the International Sculpture Center's website. Mm-hmm. And all of these characters, Carla, all of the different avatars that you made have been 3D. They've mm-hmm. been physical sculptures. And you've also fooled around with doing 3D printing and done projects and done various things. So, I mean, I know it's not your primary focus, but I wonder if you might talk about that sort of relationship between object and sculpting and digital media.
Yeah, that is a really great question. And even when I was a painter, near the kind of conclusion of my physical painterly practice, people would comment on the way I develop forms. I transitioned from representational painting to abstraction by that time. But even though I was working with a kind of all over aesthetic, maximalist generally, I would carve out forms in the paintings I made. And to a point, I also used a lot of paint, so you could kind of pick up my paintings by the surface layer of paint. And it was always like I was trying to kind of carve into it, to a point that I then, with my last painting, started actually adding sculptural objects, making them into reliefs and stretching canvas and wallpaper and all of these things. And I started calling them these different wall pieces, as if things were emerging from the walls, which I think was my revisiting trauma, memory, past, all of these different things. And that was, a kind of a way of expressing it. But also those tendencies showed up in my practice early on. And even though my practice has evolved and morphed significantly, there are certain, just like the atavistic tendencies of human, there are certain things that I see that have been consistent, including that need to kind of make form. And if I'm working with 3D, which is trompe l'oeil, which is the lie that tells the truth, unless I print it out as a 3D sculpture, a rapid prototype, I'm working in a domain that was first developed, during the Renaissance. This idea of perspective, this idea of creating deep space and volume, and that volume becomes very important to me. And that is probably why I still work figuratively. That is probably why even in my most, horror vacuic piece, you see there's a kind of delineation of things. More recently, as I've been working in VR, I've really gotten into not only sculpture, but building architectonic forms. I've created 7 different spaces, including 3 architectural structures for the Wunderkammer. And then there are thousands of objects or sculptures within. And with the desktop VR, you can actually pick up these objects virtually too and rearrange my taxonomies. And so there's definitely a sculptural component to my work, although I've never thought about myself as a sculptor. And Cleveland laughs at me because one of the things is I don't pay as much attention, and haven't for several years now, to the instantiation of things in the real, in grounded reality. I have so much fun, working in these digital spaces, building these worlds.
Without limitation, right?
Without limitation.
Without limitation.
So for example, for the Wunderkammer show that was in San Francisco, I produced one physical cabinet with over 40 different objects. Most of them were not ready-mades, but remixes of objects I ordered from the internet, because instead of my traveling across the world, I just, went on websites across the world and ordered objects that kind of represented these different categories for me. And then, I painted them and I changed them and I, remixed them. But that physical cabinet took months to produce. And then in virtual reality, I have 15 to 16 of them that are 20 feet high. Right. And so I just really appreciate that latitude. But whenever I am working on a project, it is important to me that I produce works that exist in hybrid reality. So I make physical print works, I make sculptural objects or, installations or kind of combinations of ready-mades. And I enjoy doing that, but it is frustrating as well, because when I was looking at your show again today, I was looking at these installations, and if I had my druthers, it would be able to realize something, as ambitiously as you have in physical reality. And I think so far, a lot of times I'm just disappointed with the scope and scale of what I'm able to instantiate in physical reality. And so I deal with these kind of sculptural paradigms, but in, the post-photographic space.
Yeah, that's so interesting because, when I first got into doing these things, I played around with the early Macintosh computers, and my friend Don, Don, of course, Don Guarneri.
Yeah.
He had it in 1983, 84, something like that. Very excited about it. And we played around, we drew, and we did it on the drawing programs. I don't even remember what they are now. At the time, the words were right on my lips. But, played around. But I thought, this isn't for me. It's got to have some 3-dimensional quality. And then, of course, in the early 90s, you could do it. Yeah. You could have a CAD program and you could export and whatever. So for me, the physicality has always been important and a starting place. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just because it's a proclivity or a habit or whatever. It's also because I grew up literally in my home. My mom and dad were collectors of things. Our entire home was a Wunderkammer. I don't think
that's extraordinary. Wow.
I have some of those objects around because I've been going through them lately, and they were such an incredible influence on me. I'll show you one real quick. It's really
okay.
I mean, this is this is nothing, it's not significant like a objet d'art, but it's a tin for biscuits, British biscuits, and it's got scenes of India painted on both sides. And this is an extraordinary, kind of construction, right?
Right.
Would have been produced, not 5 or 6 or 7 of them, but probably hundreds, maybe thousands. I don't even know. I don't know all the details. And this was just casually lying around the kitchen, up on the shelf somewhere, something like that. There were all kinds of these things lying around my house. And I have a few of them now, and I've been going through them. Some were horrible. Some were just absolutely ghastly, and some were absolutely extraordinary, and they were enough. So starting with the physical was always extremely important to me. And for example, I'm not that interested in VR. I don't enjoy VR experiences. I find there's something, but AR, even though they're both screen-based, I mean, one is more immersive and more developed, but they're both screen-based in essence. AR is, because it always has the possibility to see the real or to see something physically present. I think that's always been really important to me, so.
Yeah, I mean, I started working with extended reality, specifically with AR. And in quite a few interviews early on, and when I say early, I mean, it's not like I'm a pioneer, this is 2014, 2015, but 2016. But I was championing AR because I also felt that it was more poetic in terms of authentically representing the way we were living today, in that we coexist in these hybrid spaces, and that earlier distinction between IRL and URL in real life and online no longer seemed as evident. It seemed like as we all walk around constantly with this in our face, that we're existing simultaneously in 2 layers of reality. And AR represents that, and the best AR does it, I think, in a incredibly poetic way. And I guess also because I like having my feet in both worlds.
Yeah.
But over the past couple of years, I've been exploring more virtual reality technologies. And one thing I do find appealing, not to the exclusion of AR and of physical installation, that's why I do all of them. It's like, maybe I'm hedging my bets, but I have to create physical prints, sculptures, an AR piece, a VR piece, just so that it can be experienced across all of these different channels. But in VR, just the sense of presence. I mean, when you have that headset on, and the kind of digital materialism of things, when you have that headset on and things are to scale around you, and I haven't gotten deep into haptics yet, which is a place I really want to go into. It is the manifestation, albeit not there yet, but of an early manifestation of the holodeck, which I'm sitting in right now. By the way, this holodeck was hand painted on the walls of Telematic in San Francisco, and I had if you've ever seen the film Lawnmower Man, I had a carpet that was produced based on a still from the film in this little holodeck nook in the gallery. But I grew up on science fiction, and I love Star Trek, and particularly Next Generation. And so once I started dabbling in VR, and then I went down the rabbit hole, I have to say. Yeah. I have 3 VR headsets now. I do a lot of work in VR. I built like 9 different social VR spaces in 2020. There was something about that holodeck, about immersion, about things being to scale, about no longer looking at a work of art through a frame mediated, but to actually inhabit the world. And
it's interesting because we can't go to space unless we have some simulation technology.
Right.
The human mind will just die, out there on that boat in the middle of eternal nothingness.
Yeah.
That would be a very difficult, very complicated place to be without some kind of simulation technology, right? Where
Agreed.
infinite experiences could take place and happen. Like Gravity Sketch, which I've been fooling around with a lot, which is an authoring program for designing 3D objects and whatever. I mean, I can't believe that they don't get it. I can't believe they stick you in a warehouse. It's the best they can do. I can't believe they don't give us, the user, the possibility of creating our own studio, our own architecture, giving us access to live video cams wherever they may be all over the world, so that I can look out this window and see the ocean. I can look out that window and see I mean, it's the first thing they should have done, because otherwise you've got the warehouse, you've got this gray space, or you've got a dark gray space. I mean, it's like being in jail.
You got the abyss. Yeah. I mean, and, I think it's integrating, more of these platforms. So Google Earth, I enjoy in VR getting to fly over Manhattan.
Oh, totally.
Quite a bit of it is wish fulfillment. In terms of VR experiences in an art world context, however, the other limitations pre-COVID were that one user at a time was able to put on the headset. And that was something else I didn't really appreciate. And at least with AR, if you're doing it on a commercial app, people could just download the app and use their phone. Or in terms of your exhibition, I think you had 5 to 6 different
tablets. Yeah, we wanted to avoid the download thing in the exhibition.
Yeah, but I think that works really nicely.
Frustrated that they couldn't get
but you have enough tablets to accommodate.
Absolutely.
And so and I think that was important, and because tablets aren't as expensive as headsets, also, although the price has gone down on headsets, and some big exhibitions I'm sure have 6 or 7 headsets, but that was something else, the kind of existential nature of VR. So, I'm more excited about social VR, and as you were talking about, like these ways to network and to communally build and connect spaces and experiences. And I agree with you. I can't imagine. I've often dreamed of going to outer space, but of course it's on the Starship Enterprise or something where there would be incredible affordances and accommodations. Elon Musk's version, the jury's still out on that.
Yeah. Well, listen, Carla, really appreciate talking with you today. And, absolutely superb. I love your work, and I've known it for so long, and really am grateful that you participated in this project. And I've just, your enthusiasm and your energy, your boundless energy for being able to engage not only the technology, but also the sort of values, the metaphysics, the meta languages of these experiences is really extraordinary. And tell everybody again, I hope there's more than just you and me. Tell them where they can find you and find out more about your work.
Oh, sure. So you can find me on my website, carlagannis.com. Although it does need a few updates, but my latest show that I co-curated with Clark Buckner, The Archive to Come, I might not have mentioned the title of that show previously, is on the homepage. So you can read more about that show and read more about the incredible artists who participated. Additionally, I am quite active on social media. No one has deleted my Twitter account. And so you can find me on Instagram at Carla Gannis. You can also find Carla Gann on Instagram as c.a.r.l.a.g.a.n. On Instagram. And then, of course, Twitter and Facebook. So I circulate.
Facebook, same thing. Carla Gannis and also
Carla Gannis. No, Carla Gann only has an account on Instagram.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I represent her on Twitter and Facebook occasionally. So, yeah. Well, Michael, thank you so much. And this is the total mutual admiration society here, because as I was going through this, and here I'm doing the Vanna White thing. Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
Look at this. Oh, you can see, oh, wow, you can see my ring light there.
Yeah, your ring
Oh,
light.
isn't it? Let me do it so you don't see the ring light. Anyway, this is an incredible monograph and so well deserved. And as I was looking at it again today, and I got the pink version, I just have to congratulate you on such a feat.
Thank you.
Really, really.
Yeah, it was a lot of work. There was a lot of work to get that book out. I can tell you, it's a lot easier to make exhibitions. A lot easier.
Yeah.
As a friend of mine once said, an exhibition is an excuse to publish a catalog.
No, we're actually publishing a catalog for the archive to come now. So yeah,
it's got to be.
I'm about to dive in.
You know, people may argue that print media is dead and so on and so forth. I have these CD-ROM catalogs from a show I did in 1999 called Artificial Sculpture, and it's with incredible CD-ROM done with Flash. Well, you know, they just closed Flash down yesterday or 2 days ago or a week ago, whatever it was. So, you know, totally defunct, absolutely defunct. The book, it's not forever, but it's longer than digital media, you know.
Yeah, this is true.
I would love to see these companies work on that a little bit and make something as vital and fluid as DNA, you know, which can store data and be retrievable over many thousands of years. You know, I would like to see a little more ambitious
in terms of our archives and
the archive nature. So much is going to get. Oh, you know, we're kind of winding down, but nonetheless, I wanted to ask you about that. You've worked on so many projects, and clearly, you know, in 5 years, many of them will not be accessible. Or to be accessible, you would have to revisit them and retool them to exist in, you know, whatever media you'd want them, you know, whatever operating system / environment / platform you'd want them to be involved with. How do you think about that? Is that depressing to you, or are you just happy to be living in the moment and that's the nature of the work, the temporal nature, or how do you feel about it?
I'm so glad you're asking that, because actually yesterday I was thinking about Flash, for example. I found a post from 2008 where at the time I was action scripting, which was the language of Flash. Right. And I posted, Carla Gannis is action scripting the future. And so I took a screen grab of that and tweeted it out saying some tech posts don't age well. I have so many Flash sites floating around that I did both professionally and as an artist that are now defunct. And it also was my bread and butter at the time as an adjunct instructor. I taught Flash, you know, and ActionScript. And to recognize in 2007 with the advent of the iPhone that, you know, that was the first death knell for Flash when Steve Jobs wouldn't support it. And to recognize that, you know, this technology that I spent years of my life learning and, you know, teaching and employing as a narrative interactive tool is just no longer accessible is depressing. But then I sometimes have to just think of the performance nature of these things. I tell my students and try to remind myself to document everything, to document. I remember about 2 years ago, Christian Paul talking about a lot of algorithmic based work. When they collect a piece, they actually get the artist to write the code on a piece of paper. Because if we think about object-oriented programming, the syntax may change, but the basic building blocks of the code, you know, where you see variables and functions and those kind of things are going to be consistent, so that someone in the future could kind of decipher that code and rebuild the application or experience. And so those are all things I think about. I, you know, have attempted to migrate pieces as much as possible, but as you've noticed, I do work a lot and I'm always jumping to the next thing. And so to kind of backtrack, one, I just don't have the assistance and the time and the resources to try to migrate all of these early works. I'm sure that's the same with you.
It's $1 million project, you know, you go back and reconstruct all of these. I mean, you know, I talked with Chris Manzione, I remember two different things. I developed a project in Macromedia Director.
Right. I remember Director. Yeah.
That was the sculptural user interface.
Yeah.
And the second thing was I had dozens and dozens of projects in Mateo. And then Apple bought them and said, sayonara. I mean, imagine there were companies that had millions of dollars into Mateo projects, millions of dollars. And so, poor pitiful little me, with scratch and hard work, but still, nonetheless, I mean, this is really a difficult and frustrating moment, and there isn't any good, easy solution. And I also realize that libraries are maintained through huge budgets and careful management of the books. For example, even my library, I maintain it with a certain, but it's a lot easier. It's a lot lower hanging fruit than what needs to be done to do the computer, the digital media. And even if they keep the code, then there's the argument, well, the code was written in a certain environment. It's not really the same piece. And, there's that simulation, emulation argument.
Of course.
And so it's super complicated.
I just want to mention one thing about libraries. I mean, when I was at BU, I worked at Boston Public Libraries in their rare books department, and they had an entire lab. They had rare incunabula, but they had a lab to treat their books. I mean, it was just a really, really illuminating experience for me. And I have this kind of admiration, that's not the word I'm looking for the printed word and printed image, right? And that's why I myself also, I publish lots of catalogs and books, often on my own. I've probably now 6, 7, or 8 publications to date, quite a few. For a mid-career artist. Am I still mid-career? But the other thing, when I moved to New York, my first job actually was working at the New York Studio School, databasing their art library. And at the time, they didn't even have, I did a crash course. I'm finishing my thesis project. I'm doing a crash course in library science. My dad sends me this DOS database. I'm a painter, and I'm trying to learn programming. But and using the internet to download records. But I cataloged the entire library, right, with this old DOS database. But the thing is, even that's 1995. That whole system, probably 2 years after I finished it, was already archaic and obsolete. And so even the systems for archiving, the systems for maintaining, and our access and cross-referencing, all of those things need to be addressed. Which brings me to one person, Ben Fino-Radin, who was actually a dual degree student at Pratt Institute, where I used to teach.
Can you say his name again?
Ben Fino-Radin. And he was getting a degree, a master's in digital art, but also library science. And he first worked for Rhizome, then MoMA in their digital archiving department. And now he runs his own consultancy called Small Data Industries. And he is doing some incredible work. So he might be someone to look into, working with artists and their collections and finding ways to, emulate or simulate, but to find feasible solutions to manage their digital archives.
Right. So did you say it's Ben Fino-Radin?
FINO-RADIN.
Okay. FINO-RADIN.
Small Data Industries. Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
So, anyway, we have rambled on, but
yeah. This is definitely not This is definitely not the get in, get out kind of podcast. This is a meandering conversation, and it's been that way with everybody. I had the fantasy that it would be a 10 or 20 minute, let's get it. But that's just not what's happening. So I love the idea that ideas emerge through conversation.
Yeah.
You have to spend time with the conversation to make that work, to make that happen. But Carla, thank you for being part of this, and also for talking with us today. I really appreciate it.
I really appreciate it too. Thank you for your generosity. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.